Don't want to spend too much time with tier one. We will have Saquon Barkley, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, Alvin Kamara, and Jahmyr Gibbs. You clearly start all these running backs. I don't want to waste your time here. I almost don't even want to waste your time with tier two, but we will anyway. We have Jordan Mason going up against the New England Patriots. You have a 10-point spread on this game. Now, yes, you had a large spread on the Niners game last week. Well, yes, the Niners were supposed to go out there and smack the Rams, and that didn't happen. It's going to happen here with New England, right? New England's not going to be able to score against this defense. The Niners probably will be my top defensive team of the week. And if you're looking at Jordan Mason, now you've seen 3 straight weeks with him having 75+% of the snaps in this backfield. You've also seen him average over 100 rushing yards per game over the past 3 weeks. You have no Debo. You have no Kittle. So yes, this team's going to be a little bit worse than you typically expect, but you still have an implied team total up at 24.75 points. So it should be a fine spot where the Niners are able to score the ball. Jordan Mason gets the vast majority of the work in a game where they lead by a touchdown or two in the second half and they're running. Now going over to our next back, we ranked James Conner too high last week and it was 100% my fault. The underlying usage was great for James Conner. He played 75% of the snaps in this backfield. It's not like Trey Benson's done literally anything here in Arizona. My fault in ranking James Conner as high as we did was we severely underestimated the Detroit Lions rush defense. We'll talk about this with the other running back that has that Lions matchup later in this video. But I think we can say, okay, yes, if you're a running back going up against the Lions defense, you do need to be lower in the rankings than you typically are. Here, this is a complete different situation going up against Washington. Washington has been a team to consistently allow a ton of points scored overall. You have an implied team total of 27.5 points here. According to Vegas Sportsbooks, you should actually expect the Arizona Cardinals to possibly be the highest scoring offense in the NFL this week. Now, going over to Kareem Williams, I was very much concerned with this Los Angeles Rams offense last week. And obviously, the Rams were just fine. I mean, fine enough for Kareem Williams to manage to score 3 touchdowns against the Niners. What is very surprising here is, if you look at the projected environment going up against the Bears, sportsbooks are currently projecting that the injuries to the Rams will catch up with them. They have 5 offensive linemen on the IR. They'll have no Kupp for this game. He's already been ruled out. You have Puka Nacua on the IR as well. So the Rams are actually underdogs in this matchup. The Rams at the same time are only sitting with an implied team total of about 18.5 to 19 points, supposedly being one of the worst offenses in the NFL this week. But at the same time, Kareem Williams is going to have absolutely everything in his backfield, so it just won't matter. Now, going over to our next running back, obviously the comments were irate with me. They were so mad, people screaming at me saying, I'm unsubscribing for you to rank Devon Etienne this low. Blah, blah, blah. The issue with Etienne, and we said it last week, is this is a horrendous offense with no Tua. It played out this past week where Etienne, off of 11 carries, only had 30 rushing yards because the defense can stack the box. They don't have to give the passing game any type of respect here whatsoever. Now, I will reiterate what we said last week as well in a full PPR format. Obviously, Etienne's going to give you that floor based off what he can do as a receiver. He had 5 targets last week. I actually think you would move him below Jonathan Taylor if Raheem Mostert's going to be good to go, though. And then going over to Jonathan Taylor, I do have Taylor ranked a few slots higher than this in my rest of season rankings. If you look at my rest of season ranks, I have Taylor ahead of both Etienne and Kareem and James Conner and Jordan Mason. He's up there around RB6. And of course, if you wanted to check out those rest of season rankings, they're updated on flockfantasy.com every single day. But anyway, this matchup this week, going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers, is a very tough spot. Let's go through and let's look at what this Steelers defense has done through the first 3 weeks. The Steelers, week 1 against Bijan Robinson, hold the Atlanta Falcons to 10 points. Bijan Robinson gets you 68 rushing yards. Bijan Robinson saves his day with the receiving stat line, but we know Taylor's not going to have a ton of reception volume out of the backfield with Anthony Richardson not checking the ball down. Then you have the Steelers going up against the Denver Broncos. Now, of course, the Denver Broncos are the Broncos. I'm not saying Javante's as good as Jonathan Taylor. But anyway, Javante with 11 carries has 17 rushing yards. Jaleel McLaughlin with 3 carries has 6 rushing yards. So the running backs here average fewer than 2 yards per carry. And then you go over to what they did to the Los Angeles Chargers. And yes, Herbert got injured. Yes, Joe Alt got injured. But still, they stopped J.K. Dobbins right in his tracks. And Dobbins was limited to 44 rushing yards. Now, do I expect that Taylor is going to be limited the same way that these running backs were over the past 3 weeks to this extent? No, Taylor's going to be better than that. I have Jonathan Taylor ranked as RB10. But I'm just explaining why Taylor is going to be below some of these other running backs that I have ranked higher than rest of season. And it's because it is just that brutal matchup overall. Now let's go over to a running back that looks like a straight up league winner at this point. And let's look at James Cook. I mean, if you were looking at what James Cook has managed to do here through the first 3 weeks, he is currently at the very top of the NFL in total touchdowns scored, where he's had 4 touchdowns through the first 3 weeks. The snap rates, honestly, aren't going to be super useful to look at. We can say, oh, he only played 50% of the snaps against Jacksonville. He only played 47% of the snaps against Miami. But keep in mind, those were absolutely blowout games. I mean, I chose the Bills as my team to win the Super Bowl this year. It's because, one, I think they're a great offense, great defense, and you see that they are just blowing teams out. But that's not going to be the case against the Baltimore Ravens. If you actually look at this situation against the Ravens, they are favored by 1.5. So Buffalo may be trailing this game. If not, it should be a closer contest overall. I think you do get a decent amount of James Cook on the field. Now, of course, you are going to have to still be concerned about Josh Allen vulturing rushing touchdowns, where Josh Allen had 15 rushing touchdowns last season, had 2 rushing touchdowns in week 1 here. But it should be a better game environment for James Cook to be on the field more. Just the efficiency may come down overall. And then Derrick Henry at 12. Obviously, Derrick Henry went out and absolutely crushed this past week. I mean, if you're looking at what we had in week 3, this was the first time that Derrick Henry managed to see over 50% of the snaps played in Baltimore. And Derrick Henry has gotten better every single week this season. He's gone from 13 carries to 18 carries to 25 carries. And what does this go in line with? The game script for the Baltimore Ravens. When they were trailing to the Chiefs the entire time week 1, you're not going to see a lot of Derrick Henry. When they are kind of in a game with the Raiders, you're going to see some Derrick Henry, you're going to see some Justice Hill. And when they blow the Dallas Cowboys out of the water, it's going to be 25 rushing attempts for Henry. Now, of course, I will say there's always that outside chance with Derrick Henry that the Ravens are trailing. You see more Justice Hill. And with Henry, he's only had 2 receptions so far this season, so the receiving volume is not going to be able to save them in that instance. But obviously, if the Ravens are crushing, Derrick Henry is going to crush himself. Now let's go over to Josh Jacobs. Now with Jacobs, I am making this ranking under the assumption that Jordan Love is going to go this week. If you actually look at how sportsbooks are pricing this Packers offense, they are currently expecting Jordan Love to be good to go this week. We have an implied team total of 23 points here for the Green Bay Packers, which is significantly higher than what you had the 2 previous weeks with Malik Willis. Now, yes, the overall workload in terms of his snap rate has gone down for 3 weeks here with Jacobs. He's gone down from 73% to 67% to 52%. And you did have Emanuel Wilson working in, which is going to be a concern. And it's a concern that this is a tough matchup going up against the Minnesota Vikings. But honestly, I think that you can still see Jacobs in a better offense overall with Jordan Love get back to being a more efficient running back, where we are seeing, again, 5 yards per carry because the defense actually has to give some credit to this passing attack. And you do have the Packers favored over the Vikings in this contest. Now, Brian Robinson will be our next running back. Now, no, I am not ranking Brian Robinson this high because y'all screamed at me in the comment section that I ranked him too low last week. The reason I'm ranking Brian Robinson this high is I'm expecting that Austin Eckler is going to miss. If Eckler plays, we are for sure going to need to be able to reevaluate this. But you see 76% of the snaps this past week for Brian Robinson. Obviously, a lot of this has to do with the fact that Austin Eckler left the game early. And Brian Robinson, we know he can catch the ball out of the backfield. Definitely that's not his strong suit. But if you have no Eckler, I would actually expect that the receiving volume for sure comes up with Robinson. It was a down week this past week where he only had 33 total rushing yards. But I think if you have no Eckler, he's kind of a must-start guy going up against the Arizona Cardinals in what should be one of the highest scoring games of the week. Now going over to David Montgomery. David Montgomery is absolutely crushed through the first 3 weeks. And I have to take my L here. I was saying, okay, well, Jahmyr Gibbs is going to have some work at the goal line. Gibbs will have his own touchdowns. It's going to eat into Montgomery. He's going to have nothing as a receiver. And no, David Montgomery's flat out proved me wrong. David Montgomery has had a total of 8 targets through the first 3 weeks here, which isn't the best thing in the world. But when you know that this is an offense with the best offensive line in the NFL, when you know that there'll be trips to the red zone and a ton of points scored overall, if you are getting those extra 8 targets added in, it actually does raise his floor and ceiling for full PPR formats. Going over to Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones continues to be in like a running back by committee with Ty Chandler. He's averaging about 55 to 61% of his snaps in his backfield so far this season, but it doesn't matter because he has a massive role as a receiver. This is now back-to-back weeks with 6 targets. He's sitting with a total of 14 targets so far this season. This Minnesota Vikings offense looks a lot better than we were expecting coming into the year. They have an implied team total of 20.5 points here. So I think that Aaron Jones, a lot more exciting than I initially gave him credit for. And then going over to Naji Harris. Naji Harris is currently questionable, but the reports coming out of Pittsburgh are saying that he is going to be good to go this week, and Jaylen Warren may not be. Obviously, Jaylen Warren was taken out of the game early this past week, and if we're in an environment with no Jaylen Warren and pretty much just Naji Harris and Cordell Patterson, I think Naji is actually set up to absolutely crush. My favorite pick on Underdog this week in a great matchup against the Indianapolis Colts, potentially with no Jaylen Warren, I'd highly recommend you hop on this ASAP before he gets moved up, is Naji Harris to go higher than 62.5 rushing yards. It's a great matchup. You potentially have no Jaylen Warren, and he's had more than 62 rushing yards every single game this season. And with no Warren, potentially the target volume is going to be up where you had 5 targets this past week. So I think Naji is kind of a must-start guy if Jaylen Warren misses, and I would honestly go and take the higher than 62.5 rushing yards right away before he gets moved up. And if you wanted to find where you can do that, it's on Underdog Fantasy. The link's in the description. The link's in the comment section. And if you use promo code FLOCK to Underdog, you're going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, with promo code FLOCK as well, you will actually get a free Patrick Mahomes pick for Sunday. Everybody on the app has that, more than less than half a total yard. And if you are a new first-time depositor on Underdog with code FLOCK, you'll get an additional free pick. If you sign up before the Thursday night game, you're going to get the free Dak Prescott special pick on top of that. And also, code FLOCK will give you a free team review through flockfantasy.com. So make sure you take advantage with the link in the comment section. Now let's go over to a running back that was a must-start option for us a week ago. He remains a must-start option for us this week with Zach Moss. Zach Moss, great matchup here going up against the Carolina Panthers. You have a 26-point implied team total, so very similar to what we said with the Bengals last week. We said start all your Bengals, buy low on all your Bengals. They're going to be a top offense. Sportsbooks are projecting them to be a top offense yet again this week against the Carolina Panthers. This week, Zach Moss had 76% of the snaps here in Cincinnati. He actually had both the usage in the red zone, where he comes away with the rushing touchdown, and at the same time, he actually had 6 targets out of the backfield. So right now, you're currently sitting with a total of 11 targets this season for Zach Moss. It should be a very good offense. While Chase Brown does look better every time he touches the football, it doesn't matter if this coaching staff continues to give the rock to Moss. And then going over to Kenneth Walker. With Walker, a couple different things. One, if this is his first week back in, we are going to expect that he is limited, especially with how good Zach Charbonnet has looked. I would assume that this is more going to be a running back by committee until we get Walker at truly 100%. And at the same time, it is a brutal matchup going up against the Detroit Lions. If we go ahead and look up what this Lions defense has done through the first 3 weeks here, obviously we know that they shut down my James Conner this past week. One of the very many reasons I got stomped on in the Flock League this week. It was embarrassing. It was painful. James Conner, you had 9 carries for 17 rushing yards. We go to what happened with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The leading rusher in Tampa was Bucky Irving, 7 carries for 22 rushing yards. You had Rashad White, 10 carries for 18 rushing yards. I mean, just crazy. We go over and we look at what you had with Kareem Williams. Week 1, while Kyron gets there from a fantasy football perspective, the rushing efficiency is not there. 2.8 yards per carry. This is a Detroit Lions rush defense that you have to give all the credit in the world to. I did not give them nearly enough credit with our ranking of James Conner last week. That's why we are going to have Kenneth Walker depressed. That's why we are going to have Zach Charbonnet depressed in these rankings. Now, obviously, if Walker were to miss, Charbonnet is going to be up here as a must-start running back, because in that case, he would get 90% of this backfield. We're going to expect this to be much more of a running back by committee if Walker's going to go this first week here. Now, going over to our next back, we will have Travis Etienne. with Travis Etienne, the workload's actually looked pretty good. He's had about 70% of the snaps through the first 3 weeks here for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's had double-digit carries every single week. At the same time, he's sitting here with 13 targets so far this season. So the underlying work has been great for Etienne. Now, going up against the Houston Texans, the issue is this is just a game that you're most likely not going to be able to establish the run with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Right now, there is about a touchdown spread between Jacksonville and Houston. Jacksonville has been one of the worst offenses in the NFL, one of the worst teams in the NFL. So even if Etienne's a talented player with a decent workload, it's hard to rank him as anything more than a low-end RB2 until we see the Jags turn it around. If the Jags start all of a sudden actually putting points up on the board, Etienne could go a lot higher than this. Now, our next running back this week will be Cam Akers. Obviously, we're going to throw a massive asterisk on this. If Joe Mixon plays, Joe Mixon will be higher than Akers is on this list, and Akers will not be viable in the slightest. Now, I do want to reiterate as well that I will be updating the rankings on flockfantasy.com literally every single day until Sunday. So if Joe Mixon is going to be good to go, you can just go over to the site and you can see the updated rankings there. But regardless, this is a 26-point implied team total for the Houston Texans. Right now, sportsbooks are projecting the Texans to be one of the best offenses this week. I am very excited about Akers in that environment where they do have the ability to lead by multiple touchdowns in the second half and actually run the ball, where Akers isn't going to get used on third down, similar to how Joe Mixon won't in this offense. But at the same time, if you give him everything on first and second down, I think he'll be a viable low-end RB2/flex play. He'll probably be in my second flex spot in the Flock League this week if we have no Joe Mixon. Now, Ramondre Stevenson will be a running back that I also have to put in my lineup. Am I excited about it? No, not at all. The snap rate is not necessarily indicative of what we should be expecting with Ramondre going forward if you're looking at what happened with the Jets, because Ramondre did get taken out of the game for a finger injury. Sounds like he is going to be good to go. I don't necessarily think that you have to worry about that this week, but what you have to worry about is there's an implied team total of 14.5 points for the New England Patriots. It is a horrendous matchup going up against the Niners. Now, I completely understand, yes, Kareem Williams just absolutely crushed. But I think that there's a big difference between Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford to freaking Jacoby Brissett and the regime that we have here in New England. So I am concerned about the matchup, concerned about the overall offensive environment for Stevenson. If you have a team like mine, you really have no other option but to put him in your lineup, though, because he will see pretty much every touch. Now, going over to Chuba Hubbard. Chuba Hubbard's a running back that for 3 straight weeks now has been sitting with a very similar workload in terms of his snap rate. He's hovering between 50 to 60% of the snaps here for the Carolina Panthers offense, and that's probably not going to change going into the future. But what did change this past week is we actually went from one of the worst offenses in the NFL to one of the best offenses in the NFL, and Chuba Hubbard dropped 28 points when that happened. You're going up against the Cincinnati Bengals, so right now, sportsbooks are projecting the Bengals to win this game very easily. Now, of course, they did the same thing with the Washington game last week, but nonetheless, I do think that the game probably does favor Cincinnati, where we don't see as many rush attempts for Hubbard, but the receiving workload does kind of save him, and we're used to seeing implied team totals here with the Carolina Panthers of about 15, 16 points, similar to what we had with New England, but actually after this past week, sportsbooks have the Panthers with an implied team total of 21.5. Now let's go over to Rashad White. Rashad White has seen his workload dwindle. You've gone from 15 rushing attempts down to 10 rushing attempts, down to 6 rushing attempts over the past 3 weeks. If you're looking at his yards per carry, 2.07, 1.8, 2.83. Rashad White has been one of the most inefficient running backs in the entire NFL. This is similar to what we had in 2023. If you go to 2023, Rashad White was sitting here with a yards per carry mark of 3.64. 2022 yards per carry, 3.73. So Rashad White has never been an efficient back, but it only looks like it's getting worse. This coaching staff's coming out saying that Bucky Irving is going to have a larger role this week as well. It's not a great matchup going up against Philly. Really, the only saving grace that you have with Rashad White is he will be used as a receiver, which does give him a little bit of a floor in a full PPR format. Now, going over to Tony Pollard. With Tony Pollard, obviously, he absolutely face-planted this past week. Only 14 total rushing yards. But with Pollard, I'm actually encouraged that Spears didn't take everything as a receiver. Now, obviously, Spears had a decent little workload as that receiving back in Tennessee. But Pollard still is sitting with 14 total targets this season. The main issue you're going to have is this is just supposed to be the lowest scoring game in the NFL this week. Miami, Tennessee is going to be a brutal, brutal contest. I believe the over-under of this game is sitting at like 37. Devin Singletary was somebody that I initially ranked here when I prepped for the video. But the more research that we do into this, the more respect I have to give to Singletary. While the implied team total is only down here at 19.5 points, obviously there's a big difference between how the Giants offense projects this week versus, say, the New England Patriots offense projects this week. And also, the Dallas Cowboys have been by far and away the worst rushing defense in the entire NFL as well. So going through and looking at this past week, Derrick Henry, 151 rushing yards off of 25 carries. Going to what you had with Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara drops 4 touchdowns against the Dallas Cowboys with 115 total rushing yards. Going over to week 1, Jerome Ford. Obviously, they can't run the ball very often because they get blown out, but Jerome Ford still manages to almost put up 20 points in this game. So if I'm looking at Singletary, I will be honest with you, I think he's too low in these rankings. Devin Singletary will be moving up. I don't know exactly how high. Of course, I'm going to be updating these every single day on the site. So just go to the site and you can see the updated ranking of Singletary. But it's a great matchup against Dallas. And then J.K. Dobbins down here will be our last running back in this tier. With Dobbins, was that clear sell high candidate last week. I don't think I was the only person to say that. I think that was maybe like a popular take that you had this past week. And the reason was pretty clear in that you don't really have the receiving upside. The first 2 weeks, he absolutely crushed off of efficiency and great matchups against the Raiders as well as the Panthers. And going into the future, it wasn't going to be that easy, right? You're not going to play the Panthers every single week. And you see the efficiency crash down against a good team like the Pittsburgh Steelers, down to 2.93 yards per carry. However, even though we were saying that J.K. Dobbins was that sell high candidate going into this past week, I think you do actually have a pretty big positive coming out of week 3 for J.K. Dobbins. And week 2, Gus Edwards had a really large role. And week 3, no, J.K. Dobbins pretty much erases Gus Edwards. J.K. Dobbins takes 65% of the snaps for this Los Angeles Chargers offense. So long-term, I think that's great news for Dobbins. This week, you probably have no Joe Alt. You probably have no Justin Herbert. It's a really tough matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think Dobbins will be a tough play this week. But then after the bye, going into week 6, I think Dobbins could potentially be a buy low candidate at that point. Now let's go over and talk about Carson Steel. Carson Steel maybe is the toughest player to rank this week, just because we don't know what the involvement for Kareem Hunt is going to be. Now, it sounds like Kareem Hunt was officially signed to the 53-man roster, will be brought up from the practice squad. And we are going to really have to pay attention to what's coming out with Kansas City and what they are telling us for these running back roles this next Sunday. Because as it stands right now, Carson Steel is the starting running back in one of the best offenses in the NFL, coming off a game where he had 19 opportunities. Now, like I said, you also had no Kareem Hunt. So if we are starting to get if we are starting to get word that Kareem Hunt's going to be playing a role this week against the Chargers, then Carson Steel probably will fall down this list. Our next running back will be Jerome Ford. With Ford going up against the Raiders, it should be a really good matchup. But at the same time, we can just say with a lot of confidence that this Cleveland Browns offense is one of the worst offenses in the NFL. You have an implied team total of only 19.5 points here against the Raiders, despite Andy Dalton just lighting this team on fire. With Ford, you're also seeing that split role with Deonta Foreman. Over the past 2 weeks, Jerome Ford has only had a total of 17 rush attempts. It is a decent matchup. I honestly think when we tinker with these, we'll probably put Jerome Ford over Carson Steel, but definitely not a lock for your lineup. Definitely someone that you're considering in the flex. Now, Rico Dowdle is also going to be a flex consideration. Now, it is extremely difficult to look at the surface of the snap rate that you have for Rico Dowdle, of the rushing volume that you have for Rico Dowdle through the first 3 weeks. The first 3 weeks, you had a Dallas Cowboys team boat racing the Browns. The second week, you have the Dallas Cowboys being boat raced themselves by the New Orleans Saints. And then now they just get smacked down by the Baltimore Ravens. So in terms of trying to project this out into the future with how these running backs are going to get used, it is very difficult. However, what we can look at is the first drive, the second drive of this Dallas Cowboys team. When you don't have this game out of hand, Rico Dowdle through the first 2 drives looked to be the Dallas Cowboys' go-to running back. And what I'm very encouraged to see by Rico Dowdle is you are actually having 10 targets over the past 2 weeks. So if Dowdle does have a receiving role and he kind of is turning into the starting running back in this backfield, I think you can be a little more excited about him. I'm going over to Zach Charbonnet. I do expect him to have a decent little role here, even if Kenneth Walker is good to go. Now, I do want to reiterate, of course, if you have no Walker, he is going to fly up these rankings. He's had back-to-back weeks with over 80% of the snaps in Seattle. This past week, you see what it looks like when you actually have a decent game environment where he has 2 rushing touchdowns. He has 4 targets. And I mean, the man is currently sitting with 12 targets through the first 3 games this season. So I think he'll be a viable, desperation flex play, even if you have Kenneth Walker good to go. I would just warn again that this is a very tough matchup going up against this Detroit Lions rushing defense. And then Braylon Allen will be our last running back in this tier. Allen, as we've discussed, is a premium handcuff back. Very similar to Zach Charbonnet. If the running back ahead of him were to go down, he would immediately be ranked as an RB1 for us. Like how we ranked Charbonnet as an RB1 last week. We ranked Charbonnet as an RB1 the week before. That would happen if Breece Hall were to go down with Braylon Allen. Now, the issue is when Breece is healthy, you're only getting 30 to 40% of the snaps here for Allen in this backfield. Now, he's doing the most with those. He's a very talented player that's been hyper efficient off a limited workload and has looked phenomenal at times. And it's a good matchup going up against the Denver Broncos. So for sure, running back that absolutely everybody needs to be rostering, but you're probably only playing him if you are extremely desperate. And DeAndre Swift is also somebody that you're only playing if you are extremely desperate. What is very weird to see is sportsbooks are projecting out the Bears to win this game. The Bears are favored by about 2.5 to 3 points here. However, DeAndre Swift has had a decent workload every single week. DeAndre Swift in week 2 had 19 opportunities. In week 3, he had 17 opportunities in a good matchup against a soft Indianapolis Colts rush defense. And here's what DeAndre Swift has done with this. 3 yards per carry the first week, 1.29 yards per carry the second week, 1.54 yards per carry the third week. Now, I know a lot of blame here goes to the offensive coordinator. A lot of blame goes to the offensive line, but DeAndre Swift deserves some of the blame himself. Somebody that you really just can't start at this point. And you're seeing his snap rate dwindle where he started at 70%, then down to 66, and now down to 53 this past week. Now, Taji Spears is similar to what we were looking at with some of these other running backs in that he's in a committee. If you are extremely desperate, you could go ahead and throw him into your lineup. He had 54 receiving yards this past week, and maybe you say another week removed from this injury, we actually get a little bit of an expanded role for Taji Spears here, but really not somebody that you are excited about unless something changes in his backfield. Javante, also somebody else that you're not excited about unless something changes. He's had about 50 to 66% of the backfield snaps in Denver through the first 3 weeks, but he's also been laughably inefficient. 2.88 yards per carry, 1.55, 2.4. Now, with that being said, Julian McLaughlin has been just as inefficient. So I think with Javante, you can blame the situation a little bit more than you can with DeAndre Swift. Also, a running back that I'm not wanting to start unless the situation changes. Bucky Irving, a running back that looks to be gaining some steam and actually getting a larger role here in Tampa, where you see the 9 carries this past week, as well as the 3 receptions out of the backfield. And what we actually have heard from this coaching staff this week is that Bucky Irving has played himself into more snaps and more playing time. We'll be very interested to see what that looks like. Definitely can't start him. He's only played about 33% of the snaps for this offense so far this year. Chase Brown, I wouldn't be surprised if he actually plays himself into more snaps in Cincinnati. Now, full transparency, I don't have either Zach Moss or Chase Brown in the Flock League, but I did draft a lot of Zach Moss here specifically in Underdog best ball drafts. So I would love for Zach Moss to be the guy. I would love for Moss to just hold on to this job all year. But Chase Brown has looked very good. Pretty much every time he touches the ball, he looks better than Moss does. It just doesn't matter, though, right now because Moss is the guy getting used. Now, Emanuel Wilson will be the next running back. Emanuel Wilson at this point is really the only other running back outside of Josh Jacobs in this backfield, where if you look at both Marshawn Lloyd and A.J. Dillon, they both find themselves on the IR. Now, with Emanuel Wilson, it's going to be a tough matchup against a very good Minnesota Vikings defense. But at the same time, you do have the receiving role, at least from what we saw this past week, where you had the 2 receptions, 35 receiving yards, and the receiving touchdown. But I do view him just more so as that like premium handcuff back if anything were to occur to Josh Jacobs ahead of him. Then Justice Hill will be our next guy, where if you're looking at Justice Hill, over the past 2 weeks, the usage has definitely gone down because when the Baltimore Ravens are winning the football game, Justice Hill is not going to be nearly as interesting. Here, it may be a better spot, of course, when you're looking at a closer game against the Bills. I will say, of course, the Ravens are favored in this game. And then going over to Samaje Perine. Perine played pretty much the exact role that you would have expected this past week, where he was the receiving back to Carson Steele's first and second down punch. He did see 4 targets for 3 receptions, but ultimately he had nothing as a rusher. And if Kareem Hunt does come in this week, Samaje Perine's probably complete dust. And now, of course, we will be adding Kareem Hunt to these rankings on the site whenever we get official word on what the workload may or may not look like. But we'll keep tinkering with these on the site every single day. Of course, you can find those on flockfantasy.com. But yeah, if you wanted to go and tell me on my favorite running back pick this week, that's going to be Naji Harris to go for more than 62.5 rushing yards, where he's already hit that 3 times this season. Plus, it's a solid matchup. Plus, you have no Jaylen Warren. And you can find that on Underdog Fantasy. The link to Underdog Fantasy is in the description as well as the comment section. And if you use promo code FLOCK, you are going to be getting 1, a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. 2, you are also going to be receiving a free Patrick Mahomes pick, more than less than half a total yard for the Sunday night games. And if you're new to Underdog, you get a free pick on top of that. Before Thursday, it will be the Dak Prescott, more than less than half a total yard, and a free team review on flockfantasy.com. Just make sure you set up an account on flockfantasy.com with the same email address as your Underdog account. That way I know who to hook up with that free team review voucher. But I think that's all I got for you. Really do appreciate you. Really hope that you have a great day, and hope I get to check out your fantasy team in the live stream later tonight.